So for the first lecture, we're going to be talking about C++ classes and also stuff like encapsulation, object-oriented programming, and all that kind of good stuff. So just sort of a formatting thing before we start. So regardless of whether you're doing C++ or the PyRosetta for the week, there's a lot of similar behavior and rules, even if the syntax looks slightly different. And no matter which side you're going on for the week, it is exclusively to your benefit to sort of develop a comfort with the others' syntax and rules. So we will be talking about like shared behaviors and then also format specific things. And whenever we're talking about format specific things, if there's any part of the slides that has this logo, that means that it's like specifically to C++, and this is mostly syntax stuff. And then the same thing with Python. And then the only other quick thing, and I know that Hope already talked about this, but and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, just ChatGPT and other Gen AI tools. It's great. It can help you a lot. Just don't over rely on it because you will be hampering your own learning, and it's to your detriment to sort of over rely on it. And that's all I'll say at this time. Okay. So object-oriented programming. So this is the overview. We're going to talk about object-oriented programming, encapsulation, virtual functions, some basic usage of it, and then we're going to talk about inheritance, and then finally smart pointers. So what is object-oriented programming? It is a programming paradigm where data and methods are encapsulated in a data type called an object. And what is an object? An object is an instance of an abstract data type. It will have methods, it has inheritance and polymorphism, meaning that you can change the methods inside it. So in Python, everything pretty much is an abstract data type, and that's great. So that's just kind of how it normally works. And in C++, you have to define that sort of thing using a class, and that is still okay. That is still great. So first, we're going to talk about encapsulation. So encapsulation can help reduce code interdependencies. And then after that, we'll talk about virtual functions and the other stuff. Okay, so encapsulation. So what encapsulation does is it keeps the data in objects as private, and you can only access it through functions in the object, and they're called methods. So the reason why we want to do this is for data integrity, and especially as the problem you're trying to work on gets more and more complicated, this is going to become more and more and more important. And data integrity is like ensuring that relationships between the data can be kept correctly at all times. So this was an old example, but I switched it to old school RuneScape, if anyone knows that game. Anyway, so imagine you're programming for old school RuneScape. I can only dream. But if you have a enemy object type, and then you have data like the hit points and whether it's alive or not, and this is, again, the syntax for C++ and then Python. And if we're defining two conditions that if the hit points ever reaches 0, then it'll switch whether it's alive or not to be false. And if it's alive, or if alive is ever set to false, the hit points will be reset. And so then the enemy can respawn. So those are our rules for right now. If I am writing 100,000 lines of code that interact with the enemy object type, which is entirely feasible, the different facets of the game are going to be accessing different parts of the data, like the hit points, whether it's alive, and then, methods to reset these values. And this is actually from the previous replacement, much less interesting in my opinion. But without encapsulation, every single one of these 100,000 lines of codes are responsible for ensuring that this data do not get messed up. And especially, like for 100,000 lines, that's ridiculous. You need to have some sort of rules to keep this data protected instead. And with encapsulation, that's how we can do that. And so only the enemy class itself is responsible for keeping these values the way they should be. And so it's a way to sort of reduce the interdependency between your codes. So again, without encapsulation, each line of code is responsible for constraining the data integrity. And then the time or the complexity of this grows exponentially as you get more and more complex. But with encapsulation, you can sort of reduce the complexity of the problem because the class is responsible for doing this. Okay, so virtual functions. Virtual functions are generic code that being used for different purposes. And it also keeps old code from needing to be updated when you have new code. A virtual function is a member function that you expect to be redefined in a derived class. And then when you refer to that derived class using a pointer or a reference, you can call the virtual function and instead execute the derived class's version of the function. And virtual functions are a way to ensure that the correct function is called for the object. And once again, in Python, everything works like a virtual function, and that is easy and that is great. And in C++, not everything is a virtual function, but that is still okay. So every class that uses virtual functions is given its own virtual table. And this is an array that the compiler sets up when it is compiling. So a virtual table contains one entry for every virtual function that can be called by objects of that class. And each entry in this table is a pointer that will always point to the most derived function of that class. So if we have our example here, we have a base class with two virtual functions here, and then we have two different derived classes from the base. And then we are overriding the base functions, a different one in each of the derived classes. And so there's three different virtual tables that will be set up for each of these three classes, the base one and then the two derived classes. And then just to show that, at least in C++, the compiler will add a hidden pointer to the classes and the base functions, and this allows it to override it. And the compiler does this automatically, but we're just showing it here just to show you like how it actually works. Okay, so when a class is created, a virtual pointer is pointed to the virtual table for the class, and then when the object is created, it's set to the virtual table for the base. And so, for example, if I'm creating D1, it's initially set to the virtual table for base, and then it is overwritten when we're calling these functions. So I think we're starting with base. Yeah, we're starting with base. So if we're going over how these virtual tables are going to be filled out for all three of these classes, each virtual table will have two entries, one for function 1, one for function 2. And then when they are filled out, it's always going to put the most derived function in for each of these classes. So for the base, yeah. So for the base, this is the like the non-derived version. So the virtual table is always just going to point to the base versions of the function. So it'll be base 1 and base 2. When we start dealing with derived classes, so because D1 is derived from base, it can access the members of both D1 and base. But since we're overriding function 1, function 1 is now the most derived version of that function instead of base. And so, and then the same thing for D2, function 2 is the most derived version of that. And so the virtual tables will instead be pointing to the derived class version for each of these functions. And this is just a graphical way to show that. So if we have our base class, this is the virtual table, and the functions for both of them are pointing to the base version. But when you have derived classes, the virtual function is instead going to point to the derived class version, and then the unoverridden function is going to point back to the base version of the function. Also, if you guys have any questions, like it's okay to just shout them out or something. Okay, so if we set a pointer to the derived class 1, D1, what happens when we try to call function 1? And essentially, which function 1 is going to be called here? So first, the program is going to recognize that function 1 is a virtual function. It's then going to look at the virtual table. It's going to see which version of function 1 is being called inside D1's virtual table. And because D1, we have overridden function 1, it's going to call function 1 because it is the most derived version of it. If instead we called a base object instead of D1 object, what would it call instead? So yeah, when the B object is created, is instead going to point to the base virtual table instead of class D1's virtual table. And because the base class only has access to the base versions of the function, it's going to resolve to the base version of function 1. And there's an example that you guys can look at inside protocol's floppy tail mover. There is a derive function that you can see. If you guys want to kind of like trace that rabbit hole back, you can see where the base class is located. Okay, so yeah, just to summarize, virtual methods implement a method defined by the base class, and the important thing is that it must exactly match the method signature. So here we have an example in C++. So we have the class dog and then the derived class Scotty dog. And so if we have some virtual methods here, for example, like get breed, get color, and get age, in the derived class, how are we going to write the signature for get breed, for example? How are we going to instead write this? You can look ahead in the slides, but does anyone care to hazard a guess for this? Anyone? Great guess. It was a standard string get breed const. That's absolutely correct. So that's how we're going to be calling these methods for a derived class. So just a quick talk about inheritance in C++. So inheritance allows us to define a class in terms of another class, which again reduces the complexity and interdependency and allows us to have an easier time of it. And it also allows us to reuse code, which is keeping our job simpler and faster. So when you create a class, instead of writing completely new data and member functions, you can instead have your new class inherit the members of an existing class. So the existing class is always called the base class, and the new class is referred to as the derived class. And so the example here is that if we have our base class be canines, you can then have dogs which inherit everything from canines, but they also have specific information just to dogs. And then if you go even further, you can have a specific dog breed. So there's sort of like a hierarchy that they'll inherit everything from the top down. To show the exact same thing in Python, just sort of like the syntax, same deal for virtual functions. And again, pretty much everything in Python is a virtual function, so it's just pretty much how you normally use Python, but you can just set the virtual functions in the exact same way. Okay, so moving on to smart pointers. So two common problems when using pointers are memory leaks and dangling references. And so we're going to be talking about smart pointers because we use smart pointers in Rosetta to sort of solve this issue, or at least address this issue. So once again, in Python, everything is a smart pointer, and that is easy, and that is great. And in C++, not everything is a smart pointer, and that is still okay. So first thing about smart pointers, or one of the problems that this will solve is memory leaks. So if you are not deallocating the memory that you're allocated with a pointer, eventually you are going to run out of memory. And in a 32-bit system, this will be at the 4 GB mark. And then in a 64-bit system, it's a bit more variable. But smart pointers are a way to sort of avoid the memory leaks that will eventually crash your system. And then the other problem is dangling references. So dangling references are when you have two pointers that are pointing to the same object, and then someone deallocates the object using the first pointer, but there's still a second pointer that is, pointing to now a non-existent data object. And then when someone tries to access it, it will either crash or corrupt your memory, both of which are bad things. So there are two solutions to these problems. The first one is a garbage collection system. And so how that works is it has a graph traversal algorithm over all the pointers, and it'll start with all the variables, and then it'll check all the pointers for all of those variables recursively. And if anything cannot be reached, it's counted as garbage and is going to be deallocated. Another one is reference count. And so in this case, every object has an integer basically saying how many pointers are pointed at me. And then in Rosetta, we can use the shared pointer as our reference count system. So whenever an object is declared, it's put directly into a smart pointer. So in this case, pose owning pointer. And then where pose owning pointer is a utility pointer, shared pointer, et cetera, et cetera. And so OP stands for owning pointer. It's a holdover from our do-it-yourself reference count, and COP is a constant owning pointer. Okay, so some limitations about smart pointers is you cannot put an object into a smart pointer unless it's being freshly created or it's coming from another smart pointer. And the only other important thing is that, smart pointers don't eliminate all of the possible memory issues you can have with regular pointers. So, for example, if you have A holds a pointer to B holds a pointer to A, the reference counts will both be 1, but it's still sort of like its own recursive loop that even if it's unreachable, it's not going to be deallocated because it's in terms of the reference count, it's still being used, right? So you still need to be smart with how you use smart pointers and owning pointers. So I think that's the last of it for this part of the lecture. But yeah, okay. So that's it on pointers, OP, inheritance encapsulation. Any questions on this stuff at this time?
I just want to make sure I understand myself. Like non-smart pointers, you need to deallocate them. Smart pointers, you don't need to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they're not foolproof, right? For examples like this, but yes. So they're sort of like there's guardrails put around them to sort of avoid some of those other pointer issues.